Mark your calendars. We'll soon learn how much time a federal judge will give Sean Diddy Combs after he was convicted this summer on 2 prostitution-related charges. His high-powered defense attorneys are urging for release as they got some famous names to write letters of support for the Bad Boy Records founder. We're breaking down who's still on Diddy's side even after he was acquitted on the more serious charges of racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking. Thanks for joining us on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. Diddy's lawyers wrote in a recent court filing their client has been punished enough, but will the judge agree next week when he officially sentences the mogul? Or will that even matter, as there still could be a possibility he could get a new trial? It's officially been more than a year since Sean Diddy Combs has been locked up in a federal detention center in Brooklyn, New York. Ahead of his trial, his lawyers pushed for pre-trial release, and that was denied after every request, even after he was only convicted on the Mann Act charges or transportation to engage in prostitution, as Diddy's lawyers chalk up those charges to an alternative or swingers lifestyle. But the judge still kept the mogul behind bars pending the outcome of his sentencing. In his ruling, Judge Arun Subramanian wrote, "While Combs may contend at sentencing that this evidence should be discounted and that what happened was nothing more than a case of willing swingers utilizing the voluntary services of escorts for their mutual pleasure, the government takes the opposite view, that Cassie Ventura and Jane were beaten, coerced, threatened, lied to, and victimized by Combs as a part of their participation in these events." Diddy's federal trial had bombshell testimony seemingly every single day of trial. However, he was still acquitted on 3 of his 5 federal charges. However, that didn't mean his Hollywood peers publicly welcomed him back with open arms. There are some, though, who are supporting him ahead of his sentencing, like his former girlfriend, Caresha Brownlee, better known as Young Miami. She wrote in part, quote, "My name is Caresha Brownlee. I'm a mother, daughter, sister, and a hip-hop artist who has spent many years in the public eye. I want to be clear that I cannot speak on or defend anything that may have happened before I met Sean Combs. I do not condone any wrongdoing. I can only speak from my personal experience and the man I've come to know over the past 4 years. One of my most meaningful memories was when he took me to my first Met Gala. It wasn't just about the event, it was about what it represented. Sean has always made it a priority to open doors for Black people to make it sure we are seen, heard, and valued in spaces where we've historically been excluded. That night reminded me that we belong in every room, at every table, and in every conversation. He's constantly encouraged me and so many others to dream bigger, walk in confidence, and never shrink who we are to make others comfortable. I've also witnessed him doing real inner work. He made the choice to check himself into anger management, start therapy, and commit to physical healing through therapy. That takes strength, humility, and self-awareness. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he wanted to grow and to become a better person. In my personal experience, Sean is not a danger or threat to the community. He is a man of God, someone who uplifts, supports, and inspires those around him to be better mentally, physically, and spiritually. But more than anything, he's a father, and his kids are the ones who look up to him the most. They need him. His presence, love, and guidance matter deeply in their lives. I truly believe that he belongs at home with his family, the people who mean the most to him, and who continue to be his greatest source of purpose and strength. Judge, that's a good man. Music producer Dallas Austin wrote in part, "As I have become to know Sean over the years, he has become like a brother to me. I have always seen him as a man of unwavering dedication to his loved ones, his family, especially his mom and children. He is a devoted father whose family always comes first, and the balance he maintains between his personal and professional life is both inspiring and admirable." Former Love and Hip Hop star and music producer Stephen Jordan, aka Stevie J, wrote in part, "Being in this entertainment business for 30 years and being friends with Sean, we've both endured personal challenges with anger and drugs, as I've been going to therapy and taking all the necessary precautions never to look back at addiction again. I'm proud of Sean. I've read in the press that he's clean and sober and also taking anger management therapy to become a better person, because we all fall short as long as we correct ourselves and never revert to our old ways." Now that's just scratching the surface. The defense submitted more than 65 letters of support in favor of Combs to the judge. There are also letters from each of his children, with the exception of his daughter, who's a toddler. However, his youngest daughter's mother, Dana Tran, wrote a letter of support. So did his mom, his sister, the mother of his daughter, Chance, too. So will the judge side with the very man whose motto was once "bad boy for life" come sentencing? Well, his defense team sent the judge nearly 200 pages of reasons why he shouldn't be kept behind bars. Some of the reasons include the jury. which, if you remember, some jurors made headlines themselves over the course of the trial and even after. For example, juror number 6, who was dismissed from the case after prosecutors were concerned he made inconsistent statements during the jury selection process about where he lived. Then another juror experienced health issues, putting a halt on the trial for a day after he experienced vertigo on the way to court. Then there was the alternate juror, who didn't deliberate but still told CNN he would have came to the same conclusion. Even though the juror, who only went publicly by the name George, didn't go into the deliberation room, he still sat through every single day of trial, even being one of the few people in the entire world to see the freak-off tapes. But he told CNN's Laura Coates the sex tapes weren't as graphic as expected, saying it was pretty tame. It was a lot of rubbing oil and stuff. It wasn't anything too graphic. The jury was obviously pretty important in the verdict outcome in this case, notably that the jurors who did deliberate didn't convict him of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking. Now, the defense is hoping to use that in their favor. In the filing, Diddy's defense team wrote, "The jury rejected the government's theory that Miss Ventura and Jane were victims of sex trafficking. There was overwhelming evidence which the jury credited that Miss Ventura and Jane were enthusiastic and voluntary participants in the sexual activity underlying the case." Hey, by the way, there's a reason Law&Crime is the go-to spot for legal and true crime content on YouTube. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan is America's largest personal injury law firm. They're a firm with more than 1,000 attorneys, and that's because they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being only offered $500,000. Even if you think your case isn't worth millions, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it truly so easy. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LCnews by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on your screen. We will not relitigate the trial or waste space explaining why the jury's not guilty verdicts on sex trafficking and RICO conspiracy were the only just verdicts supported by the evidence, or rehash all the evidence showing why the government's force, fraud, or coercion arguments at trial were unfounded. Suffice it to say that the jury already weighed the strength of that evidence, and it is not relevant here and should play no role at sentencing. Now, his attorneys argue Diddy and his girlfriends, specifically Cassie and Jane Doe, were all adults when they participated in the Wild King nights or hotel nights or freak-offs. The defense says Combs had serious relationships with those women and were in consensual sexual experiences with adult third parties. And they argue he didn't profit in any way of these hotel nights or freak-offs like a Mann Act defendant typically would. Throughout his trial, drugs were brought up ad nauseum, and this recent court filing was no exception. Diddy's lawyers claim drugs and a high-profile celebrity lifestyle played a role in his conduct. They wrote, without minimizing Mr. Combs' conduct, this is in many ways a sex, drugs, and rock and roll story. Mr. Combs had severe substance abuse problems throughout the entirety of the offense conduct and participated in a high-octane celebrity lifestyle. So did Miss Ventura, independently and not because of Mr. Combs. As for Jane, she willingly took ecstasy and other drugs with Mr. Combs, which became a part of their relationship. Now, during trial, the defense seemingly implied what happened in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel was due to a bad batch of drugs. But in this new filing, Diddy's defense team says that the Intercontinental Hotel beating of Cassie was a rare time where Combs committed acts of violence during his relationship with Cassie. This despite Cassie herself testifying she couldn't recall how many beatings there were because there were so many. In this recent filing, though, the defense wrote, the violence was not entirely one-sided. However, Miss Ventura testified there were times when she initiated physical fights with Mr. Combs. On one occasion, for example, she punched Mr. Combs in the face. Mr. Combs, for his part, is the first to exclaim that these acts of domestic violence against Miss Ventura are inexcusable. But the notion that the violence or coercion had a nexus to freak-offs is not true, as the jury clearly found. Now, part of the reason the judge kept him behind bars pending sentencing was because he admitted to being physically violent with Jane as recently as June of 2024, 3 months before his arrest. Jane testified testified she started that physical altercation and admitted to throwing things at him, calling him a pedophile and a monster after punching him in the head. The defense wrote, by that point, Mr. Combs was intoxicated as he had consumed multiple glasses of champagne and multiple shots of tequila. Again, Mr. Combs knows that partaking in any type of physical violence with a woman is inexcusable, but the jury rejected the argument that the violence caused Jane to participate in a hotel night. Throughout the court filing, the mogul's defense team argues his conviction isn't like other Mann Act cases where the DOJ, for example, limits the prosecutions to cases involving sex trafficking minors or defendants who engage in commercial prostitution enterprises as panderers or call girl operations. They wrote, quote, in other words, only 1% of Mann Act cases we identified involved so-called buyers or Johns. That number alone speaks volumes and corroborates the conclusion that the DOJ does not seek to incarcerate Mann Act defendants who merely purchase prostitution services. During the trial, we learned through testimony what some of the male escorts or entertainers that were hired do during these freak-offs or hotel nights, and that was through the testimony of Daniel Phillips and Sheree Hayes, aka the Punisher. Diddy's defense argued this is the only case they've identified where prosecutors claim professional consenting adult males were Mann Act victims. Writing, the government now claims that the male escorts were Mr. Combs' victims, but this is apparently the only case in Mann Act history where the government has argued that consenting professional adult male escorts or entertainers who made thousands of dollars were victims. The Mann Act did not originally treat men as victims, and Congress never anticipated such an application of the statute. They argue the time he served has been punishment enough, especially serving time at MDC Brooklyn. His team argued the mogul is routinely subjected to violence, both directed at him and at others. They point one example from less than 2 weeks ago, writing, on September 12th, for example, defense counsel was in the middle of a legal video call with Mr. Combs, which was summarily ended at 2 p.m. because of a stabbing that locked the facility down for the next several days. They write living conditions at MDC remain inhumane, lockdowns remain common, and other conditions are similarly horrible. There are 10 different examples listed of what Diddy's life truly has been like behind bars, a far cry from his life of luxury, including constant suicide watch. This means that every 10 hours, Mr. Combs must present his identification card to the guards to show that he is alive and well. Limited access to clean water. Mr. Combs often heats his water to have clean water to drink without getting sick. Sleeping in a dorm-style room within 2 feet from other inmates with the bathroom in the same room with no door. Mr. Combs has not breathed fresh air in nearly 13 months or felt sunlight on his skin. Often walking with a limp due to a painful knee injury that requires surgery that he has not received in federal custody. Lack of access to healthy or edible food, which is essential to pre-diabetics. The food that Mr. Combs has survived on includes expired processed pork, chicken, and beef, which on any given day can contain maggots. Lack of physical exercise with weights or any proper equipment. No physical therapy for his several shoulder and knee injuries. No functioning washing machines/dryers. And extreme temperatures, freezing cold or burning hot. Now, after his trial and the dozens of lawsuits he faces, his lawyers argue that his legacy has been destroyed, stating, due to adverse publicity and the allegations which the jury rejected, he faces nearly 100 lawsuits, most of which have been filed by individuals he has never met before, all of which contain made-up claims by individuals seeking to profit from Mr. Combs' downfall. Unfortunately, these lawsuits have involved his family, with his 84-year-old mother being sued in several states by individuals and his sons also being sued alongside Mr. Combs. They go on to write, as bad as life is inside of MDC, Mr. Combs has suffered countless other losses. Since his incarceration and conviction on the Mann Act, these and other collateral consequences to his life have been personally devastating. He has been separated from his family, has mounting legal bills from the indictment and defending lawsuits that were the direct result of the United States Attorney Damian Williams' prejudicial press conference announcing this case, and has lived in MDC for over a year, despite having every intention on fighting this case from day one. His defense attorneys cite other instances where his life has been systematically dismantled. For example, after Cassie's lawsuit and the lawsuits after, his companies were unable to operate as they once were, and he had to let go of over 1,000 employees. Some employees, according to the document, were unable to get new employment because of their past association with the mogul. His federal case has also had devastating consequences for his children. They were canceled and lost business opportunities. The family's Hulu show was canceled after Cassie's lawsuit. He was removed removed from the boards of 3 charter schools he created. He was stripped of his honorary doctorate degree from Howard University. He was forced to return the key to the city of New York. And he had to step down from his TV network, Revolt, which, according to the filing, was one of 2 black TV networks in the United States. So in all, the defense is hoping the judge sentences him to a 14-month sentence, meaning if the judge sides with him, it's likely he could be out of jail before the holidays. As of this recording, though, prosecutors haven't submitted their recommendations for his sentencing, but they've previously said that he has an extreme history of violence and that the attempts to minimize his conduct show he's still very dangerous. So that was a lot, right? A lot of legalese, a lot of pages to go through. So let's break it down further with none other than criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Safa, always great to see you, and thanks so much for joining me. Let's take a little step back. It's almost sentencing time for Diddy. He needs support. The defense sent a bunch of letters, some including from Young Miami, Dallas Austin, Stevie J, the mothers of his daughters Love and Chance, his mom, his sister, all of his kids minus the youngest one. But what did you make of the letters of support?
I'm not surprised to see letters of support here. That's actually pretty typical as sentencing is about to commence, or shortly, at least a week or two before the sentencing commences. And a lot of times defendants and clients will submit letters that are on behalf of family members and loved ones, giving a clearer picture to the judge as to who this person is generally, or who this person is and what they mean to their family and their loved ones. And that's a part of what we call a mitigation or sentencing memorandum that goes to the court in order to get a lesser sentence, or to give the judge an idea of, this is a good guy, you know, mistakes happen or bad things happen, but he's been reformed, rehabilitated, and we as his family need him back.
And are you surprised more famous faces didn't come front and center to possibly also voice their support in favor of Diddy? I was surprised to only kind of see really the 3 standout names being Dallas Austin, Young Miami, and Stevie J, at least to me. But are you surprised other famous faces didn't also voice their support through letters, like maybe Ye, who attended the court that one day?
I'm actually not too surprised that we haven't heard more from some of the other celebrities, because I think that anybody with a pretty sound PR team is going to tell them to stay far away from this and to not give any opinions of it. I am kind of surprised that we haven't heard anything from Ye, but you know, that's his prerogative. Of course, he has shown his support throughout the trial, and anybody who is willing and wants to support Mr. Combs through the sentencing phase and provide a memorandum or a letter, excuse me, then they're able to do that. But I think, considering what the defense has provided to the court, there have been significant amounts of letters and things of that nature that the judge can go off of to get another side of Mr. Combs, maybe different from what the judge has heard at trial.
Do you think any of the letters kind of swayed maybe even your opinion in terms of what we heard at trial versus kind of the aftermath, even, you know, before the trial began, that made you change your opinion in any type of way? I kind of felt like everything just felt kind of repetitive a little bit.
I think the most captivating letter that I got a chance to view was his mother's, and she makes a very good point. She's an 85-year-old woman, or in her mid 80s. She doesn't know how much time she has left on this earth. And so one of the things that I think is important, and what really spoke to me and would probably speak to the judge, is wanting the ability to spend the end of her life with her, granting them the ability to reconcile their relationship outside of him being incarcerated, also granting the ability for the family to essentially be reunited and to satisfy this mother's wishes of having her son reunited with his children, her grandchildren, so that they can heal, move forward, and spend the rest of her life, or her last years, together.
And, you know, Janice was a fixture at every single day at trial. I don't think there was a day she missed. She was there every single day inside that courtroom, making sure that her son had support during especially those hard parts of the testimony and hard parts of the trial. But what's your reaction to the defense asking for 14 months? Would that essentially mean, if the judge goes in favor of the defense, is it possible that Diddy could walk out of that courthouse next week?
Absolutely. That is exactly the case. And that's what the defense is essentially going for, is that 14-month sentence, which I'm not exactly sure of the time calculation that he has spent incarcerated, but looking for essentially time served here so that he can go back home to his family. And as a part of the sentencing memorandum, and there are sentencing factors that the judge can consider in his determination. There's the guideline range on which Mr. Combs will fall. I think that the defense has essentially argued, or will argue, that 14 months is within the guideline range. I expect that the prosecution is going to argue that there's a higher guideline range for him, which I think maybe 51 months or something of that nature. I'm not completely sure. I don't have it in front of me. And so the judge is also going to take into consideration the nature of the offense, the rehabilitation, any threats to the community, all of those things. And he can even take into consideration some of the things he's heard at trial in order to make a determination of what the sentence is going to be with Mr. Combs. There's also some case law that I believe has been provided to the court from the defense that essentially says that individuals who have been sentenced on the Mann Act violations have not received a higher sentence or have not remained in custody as long as Mr. Combs would be facing. And I think there also may be some outstanding motions, and I don't know if they've resolved them yet, as far as asking for a new trial and things of that nature that I think the judge is going to address prior to sentence.
Yeah, and that'll be happening tomorrow. And I'll definitely be there for that, bright and early as usual. I'm thinking back to the time during trial I was covering it. But in terms of just that last point you were making, Safa, where the defense was kind of saying that Diddy's conviction in terms of the Mann Act convictions, count 3 and 5, are unlike any other cases that they were citing, because they cited plenty of cases. Now, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so it was really kind of interesting just reading through everything. But in terms of the defense's argument, do you think that they make a solid argument that Diddy's conviction wasn't a situation where he was transporting minors across state lines or people against their will? The defense's main point, something that they've been arguing throughout the entire trial, was that these were consenting adults who were doing adult things, that this was a swinger lifestyle. Everything, again, was kind of within the whole consenting kind of circle here, but also that these entertainers or these escorts weren't paid for sex, that they were paid for time. But what's your reaction to the defense's argument?
I think the defense makes a pretty good argument there. And I think what we have to remember, and what the defense is trying to show the judge, is essentially, he's been found not guilty on the most heinous charges, particularly the RICO offenses. The factual basis for the Mann Act charges really deal with an intimate personal relationship that he had with some of his girlfriends, that they just participated in this swinger type lifestyle, which is somewhat common here in the United States, and we've heard it before. Escorts are provided or spend time with individuals or are purchased for their time with couples. And if they decide to engage in sexual activity, then because they're all adults and they all consent to do that, then that is well within their right. So I think the defense makes a good point to that respect. I think what they're trying to do is essentially not criminalize sexual activity or maybe some sort of taboo type of sexual lifestyle here. So it's going to be interesting to see how the judge takes that in at sentencing or after reading these memorandums. I can expect that the prosecution is going to say, Judge, this is more than that. This is somebody who has been violent towards women and other individuals throughout his history of being an executive producer or an executive and having these high profile roles in society and in the music industry. And this goes just beyond a sexual relationship with his prior girlfriends or with these escorts.
And with the judge kind of having the hand here when it comes to sentencing, do you think that, given that Sean Combs has been behind bars, even though there have been multiple attempts to get him either pre-trial release, post-trial release, just some form of release or conditional release, all of that sort, but do you think that the judge, when he's taking this into consideration next week, do you think he'll be looking at the full scope of everything that he learned through trial? Or do you think it'll really just come down to the convictions, the Mann Act convictions, transporting what the government says prostitutes across state lines, the victims across state lines, all of that sort? But do you think that the judge will take into consideration the whole scale of the trial, or just specifically the Mann Act convictions?
I think the judge is going to take into consideration the whole scale of the trial along with the convictions. Mm-hmm. And what I personally and professionally think is happening here is, and this is also part of why Mr. Combs' bail applications have been denied, and judges will do this sometimes. If a judge knows that he or she is going to give somebody time served or release them shortly after sentencing, judges will keep defendants in custody because their time is counting towards the sentence. And so I have some sort of feeling here that the judge in this case, he has continued, he seems to have been somewhat favorable to Mr. Combs after he was acquitted of the racketeering charges. I believe that the judge made a comment to Mr. Combs asking him, do you want to go outside? And that really sticks with me because that tells me that the judge was considering allowing Mr. Combs to be released at that point in time, and ultimately made a decision not to do that. And that could have been because he was statutorily bound to keep Mr. Combs in custody, but also knowing that he may ultimately release him on this next court date or on his sentencing date, it gives him less blowback as opposed to just releasing him and then bringing Mr. Combs back to court and saying time served. You keep him in, you keep all that time counting so that once I sentence you to time served or that 14 months, you're done, this is over.
And that's a very interesting point. And I'm very anxious to see what the judge will be considering next week when that sentence ultimately comes down. But overall, looking at that kind of what I feel was kind of like a last ditch attempt by the defense to kind of really save Sean Combs's public image. Because to me, it seemed like, throughout the document, and it was nearly 200 pages, that it seemed like the defense, they were making some of the arguments that they had made previously, right? But also we were kind of really getting an inside look into what Diddy's life has been like behind bars, where the defense was claiming that he hasn't had access to fresh air or, healthier options in terms of food, that there have possibly been exposure to maggots, and that he's been having to walk with a limp in his knee because he hasn't been able to get surgery, just all the things that you would kind of expect in a jail-like system or a prison-like setting. But it seems like from the defense that their whole point was that he's suffered enough, that the conviction and what he's been going through at MDC Brooklyn have just been enough, especially given the convictions that the jury ultimately rendered in their decision. But what are your thoughts on just the whole document overall? Do you think that that was kind of the last hurrah for the defense to kind of be like, look, this is everything that my client is suffering through as he's been incarcerated for more than a year now?
Yeah, what the defense is doing is showing the judge that Mr. Combs has, again, suffered enough, that he's learned his lesson, that him being in custody has essentially changed his view, changed his perspective, and has been an appropriate punishment considering the crimes that he has been convicted of. One thing I will say is it is very inconvenient to be a defendant in this country, especially a defendant that is in custody. And so Mr. Combs, along with many other individuals that are incarcerated, and this is more so a prisoner rights issue, he's experiencing what a lot of Americans unfortunately face and deal with in this country. And my hope is that, if and when he is released, that maybe he becomes an advocate for prisoners' rights, considering that he himself has had these experiences. And there are parts of the criminal justice system that do need to change with respect to incarceration. But I do agree with you that this is a last-ditch effort to really show the judge that he's been punished. He's been punished enough. He has had a significant fall from grace. And because of that, and because of his family needing him to return and wanting him to return, and he's missing out on his daughter, who's very young, and there has been some sort of behavioral changes in her. Mom may not be here for many more years, and he has other children that he needs to tend to. And according to some of the letters, he's been a positive impact for the community. All of these taken into conjunction are the last ditch effort that the defense is putting forward to the judge to get that 14-month sentence.
And it'll be interesting to see if we actually hear from Sean Combs himself when he is actually sentenced, see if he'll give somewhat of a statement before the judge ultimately renders his decision on what that'll be. Yep, exactly. And then I know we have some post-verdict motions that are going to be happening tomorrow. In terms of just the judge possibly granting Sean Combs a new trial, how likely do you think that'll actually happen?
I don't think that's going to happen. I think that we can expect that his sentencing is going to go forward, and I think it's on October 4th. Some of these motions, they might be just dispositive, and the judge is going to have to address them. But unless there's a significant legal issue that ultimately may overturn his conviction on appeal, I expect that we are going to go forward with the sentencing next week.
Especially after the defense sent all those filings. So I'm interested to see what the prosecution has to say in kind of their filings whenever they kind of seemingly rebut everything that the defense has said. Because I know their big thing was that Sean Combs has been violent as recently as June of 2024. And so it'll be interesting to see what their kind of last-ditch effort is before the judge, before sentencing happens on Mean Girls Day, which is October 3rd. So Safa Robinson-Ferrer, thank you so much for your insight into this case. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Sean Combs does have a court appearance scheduled for Thursday for all post-trial motions. Then next Friday, he's scheduled to be sentenced. And of course, Law&Crime will be on the ground at the federal courthouse, so tune in for live coverage next Friday on October 3rd. Thanks so much for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner.